This is the Fujifilm 18mm f2 lens, and before we jump in and talk about the lens itself, I wanted to show you a few of the photos and kind of what I usually use it for. So this 18mm is one of the first lenses that Fujifilm came out with when they first announced the X Pro 1 like 10 years ago in the original XF mount. I bet no one at Fujifilm actually even remembers this, but they actually sent me an X Pro 1, a 35 1.4, a 14mm 2.8, and an 18 to 55 2.8 to f4 kit lens. I used it for elopements, I used it for travel, I used it for all sorts of things. And so, for whatever reason, this little 18mm was just never something that I ever actually even tried or was interested in, and I was definitely wrong for not being interested in it. It is very, very small and just fits the whole Fujifilm kind of aesthetic, I feel like, pretty well. And it's not a pancake by any means. It's still bigger than, you know, like the X100V's lens. But if that 28mm-ish field of view is what you like, this is a pretty darn compact setup, and is actually a lot smaller than the X100 series, and then adding that WCL adapter. The build quality is okay, but not amazing. It's super lightweight. The focusing mechanism is another one of those focus by wire type things that is just kind of like meh at best. It's just one of those lenses where I don't even consider using any sort of manual focus for, because honestly, especially for a lens at this age, I guess, it actually still does pretty darn well. I will say that I used this combo actually as my overhead camera setup in my office here for a long time. And one of the things that is pretty annoying about it is it's very, very audible when it's focusing. So I'll put it up to the microphone here and we can listen to it. So, not the greatest thing in the world, and especially if you're doing some sort of video work, obviously you're not gonna want to have those noises. But generally from an autofocus standpoint, I haven't really had much of an issue with it. That being said, I haven't used it that much on professional shoots, and I've mainly just used it on the XE4 as just kind of like a supplemental other type of camera. Usually if I'm taking one camera and I just want a 35mm equivalent, I'll take the X100V. And if I want to have something other than that, I found that pairing this 18mm with another 50mm equivalent, like either the Fujifilm 35 1.4, or I've actually been using the 7 Artisan 35mm f0.95 a lot. It's manual focus, and I did a whole video about it. That way you get a 28mm equivalent as well as a 50mm equivalent-ish. And it can kind of fill both of those realms pretty well in a super small little package. So without getting too crazy and in-depth, I do want to just open these up in Lightroom and show how they look. I tried here to focus in on these little pulls, which obviously didn't really happen, but there does look like there is a decent amount of detail. As you go up into the corners, these aren't supposed to be sharp technically because it's focused kind of back in here somewhere. But you can see where it kind of just like is pretty soft, and you can see some chromatic aberration. I do have the lens corrections turned on. Here's another spot where this is just kind of a larger scene, and we're viewing this, in 4K. You definitely have decent sharpness, but where you have this kind of front area out of focus, it's kind of hazy, glowy. That being said, it kind of, can give you that filmic kind of vibe, if that's what you're looking for. This area up here, 18 millimeters f2, you're not going to get the creamiest bokeh no matter what you're doing. This is at 1/250th of a second, so it shouldn't have any blur, but it kind of feels like it's almost has motion blur over here, kind of like a smearing effect. It's kind of an older lens. It sort of performs as such. So even at 5.6, you don't have like complete edge-to-edge sharpness, but it's more than passable for kind of what it is, in my opinion. Here's kind of a close focus and bokeh test. So I think the bokeh actually looks really good here. We have some pretty round little orbs, and it seems pretty soft, especially for how busy of a background this is. So for kind of like a portrait-y kind of thing or whatever, it does actually look pretty good. There's detail, but it's not super, super sharp. But overall, I think the rendering of the image in general looks pretty good. All right, so here we can see this is at f2.8, simply because I was a little overexposed otherwise. You can see that, especially in the center, there is a pretty decent amount of detail here. You can see that it does start to fall off, so like focus is here, but it's not super in focus. And it almost, again, has that almost like a motion blurry kind of thing here, even though we're at 1/4000th of a second. And here's another test that just kind of shows what we look like at infinity. This is at f2.8. And you can see Mount Rainier has a lot of information in it. You can see the ferry over there. There's kind of a lot of stuff going on there. The people here are a little bit soft. You can see that this stuff is kind of soft, and just the information there, a little bit of chromatic aberration, definitely soft over here. So basically, if you want something that will be sharp in the center, but you don't really care about the edges being sharp, then rock and roll, this lens is probably for you. That being said, I don't really consider this a professional level lens. The sharpness is fine in the middle. It definitely lacks in the corners. And if you are doing something like weddings or commercial work or something like that, I do think upgrading to like the 18/1.4 or the 16/1.4 or something like that it's gonna give you both better image performance and just a better build quality and all that kind of stuff would be a great thing. But that being said, for a personal use type of thing, I have had zero issues with the image quality and have just more loved how small and compact this thing is. And just for like a general take everywhere kind of personal enjoyment camera setup, well, of course I love something like the Leica Q2, and I was also pretty surprised about the WCL adapter that goes for the X100V. But for like the ultimate kind of like nicer personal use budget setup, I do think that this, even in 2022 and beyond, is still a great little lens, especially for the cost, the size, all that kind of stuff. And I think that it's kind of like a polarizing lens to many people, where some people just hate it and think it's awful. I heard a ton of negative things about this lens until I got it, which may be the thing that's clouding my judgment, because I was expecting it to be terrible and now it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was, and it has actually been really enjoyable to me. But I will say that if you're taking this as a modern, fast, mirrorless lens, it's not going to give you that same thing. It's gonna hunt a little bit. You're not gonna get super, super sharp results. But if you want something that only costs a few $100s on the used market, can give you some really cool results in a pretty darn compact package. I do really think that this 18mm is a pretty cool combo, especially with a really small camera like the Xe4. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comments below. I have a ton of other Fujifilm videos on this channel, so I'll definitely link one of the playlists up here. Subscribe down here if you haven't already. You can support me on Patreon here, and I'll see you all on the next one.